Okay, let us do the thing. So I just keep reading more about the brain. This is what's required while we're in part one territory. Eventually, we'll constantly just be worried about practical tips and stuff like that, motivation. I guess all this stuff brings us back to the brain, in each of these stages. I don't think we just wanted to talk about practical tips without explaining why that stuff actually works. So, well, anyway, I've been explaining this schema theory interpretation slightly incorrectly. I'll say incorrectly. I've been technically it's correct, but I've been saying it in a reductionist sense, like a sense where I'm not exact, or I'm not being precise enough about what's actually resulting in our experience of meaning. So we leverage schema theory in the document right when we start considering how we can conceptualize our understanding. So we're now weaving together, we're making the connection between what's in our brains, like physically. So, we've got these connections in our brain, and then the actual experiences we have of meaning. So not like, that day felt meaningful, or my life feels meaningful, but like the fact that all things that we could think about are meaningful in the sense that they tell us about meaning, like what this thing is that I'm holding up. So, right, so we leverage schema theory as this way to transition from the physical connections in the brain to the concepts that we think about, like a pen. And schema theory basically discusses how certain connections are activated, and this results in the experience we have of a certain thing. So you could say that we have a schema for a pen, or a schema for a tree. And that's like the simplistic version of it, but we have to think that it's not like my understanding of a pen is just a singular thought of a pen. So when I think about different properties of a pen, different parts of my brain are actually being activated very quickly. And the other thing that makes this a little bit more precise is that it's not just like a singular brain wave creates the image of a pen in my mind. It's actually like energy doctor. I think we maybe later, but for now, we gotta stay on topic here. Specifically talking about how the brain creates the meaningful images that we experience. So kind of crucial. I have a recommendation on topic. Well, that might be a later topic then in the day. Feel free to put it there now, but I can't say with certainty that we'll get there, depending on how long this takes. Depending on if I want to actually make changes here. Because I'm trying to, we might want to read through this schema theory section as well, just to see if there's anything that makes it really clear that I'm not being as precise as I should be in this section. But the thing that's important is like a thought about a pen, like when I'm seeing it or when I'm thinking about a pen, isn't just a singular pulse in the brain. It's not like a singular brainwave. It's not like these pen schema connections are being lit up and now I see the pen. But it's rather a sustained activation of these same connections many times over. And as we'll read here, they as in scientists have figured out what they believe to be the amount of time that needs to transpire while this loop is happening for you to actually then get the image in your conscious experience. So But I went about this in a slightly incorrect way because I think schema theory supports that more robust view. But I said it seems to me that schema theory is slightly reductionist when it comes to how certain thoughts or behaviors are acted out in the brain. These behaviors and conscious experiences are the result of brain connections being activated, right? So that's still true. But it implies potentially that it's a singular activation that creates the image. But it's not simply that there is a subset of brain connections that, if activated once, they would result in the experience. Rather, a more sophisticated string of sets are activated to create these persisting, even if only for a moment, experiences. Is this an apt way of thinking about the connection between neurodynamics and our experience? All right. So, your perspective aligns with more sophisticated contemporary views in cognitive neuroscience, limitations of static schema models. Schema theory, while powerful for explaining generalized knowledge structures, often risks being seen as reductionist if interpreted as implying a single monolithic or passively stored brain representation, a subset of connections, for complex thought or behavior. The brain doesn't just store a schema, it constructs a pattern of activity in the moment when that schema is needed. Right? So constructs is a weird word here. It's not like it's constructing like the connections. It's triggering a pattern of activity in the moment. And that pattern of activity is what results in the experience. So the neurodynamic perspective, your idea of a more sophisticated string of sets of connections being activated, directly points to the concept of neurodynamics, the study of how neural activity changes over time. This approach emphasizes that conscious experience and behavior are the result of time-evolving transient patterns of activity across vast networks of the brain. So it's important for us to look up transient here, lasting only for a short time. So that's what we mean by. So not only obviously is a wave happening and it's transient in the sense that it's a wave and then that's it. It's not like things are being turned on and then turned off. It's a pulse. But when it's talking about transient here, transient patterns means it's going to be cycling for it. Like turning it on would mean it starts a feedback loop. I don't know if we could call it a feedback loop, even though it probably is a feedback loop, but a loop. Key concepts that fit your description include transient attractor states. A thought or experience isn't a fixed location, but a temporary stable pattern of activity, an attractor state, that the neural network settles into for a period. When the experience changes, the network moves to a different state. Neural trajectories. The sequence of these transient states over time forms a trajectory through the brain's state space. This continuous shifting path is what creates the experience's dynamic flowing nature, the string of sets you mentioned. And then predictive processing. In this view, the brain is constantly generating and updating predictions based on both incoming sensory data and its existing schemata, internal models. The experience is the result of the complex moment-to-moment interaction and reconciliation between these predictions and the reality, prediction error. Right, but that's somewhat of a different type of interpretation here. We're really just looking. We're saying, regardless of why these things are being activated, what's the translation between the brain activity and the experience? Functional connectivity. The connections themselves are not just static wires. Their effectiveness and pattern of communication, functional connectivity, change rapidly based on the task and context, further supporting the idea of the set of connections is transient, not permanent. So this is also pointing to neuroplasticity, where these things that are being activated are changing constantly. So technically, there's never a wave that's exactly the same, because it's affecting its own transformation, and many other things are affecting the transformation of these connections, all in real time. In summary, it's not simply the presence of the connections, the schema, but the dynamic temporal sequence of their activation that gives rise to the richness and persistence of our conscious experience. Your formulation correctly shifts the focus from a fixed brain structure to an evolving brain process. All right, so then I say, okay, to be clear, do we have evidence that transient attractor states, a temporary stable pattern of activity, makes up the quote unquote atom of experience. And is this aptly thought to be not a single activation of a set of connections, but rather a recurring activation of a theoretically discrete set? I imagine there's always a slight variation of connections. So this, I imagine there's always slight variation, is referring to what I just mentioned, the neuroplasticity side of this. But I'm kind of asking, is it the case that it's effectively the same set of connections being activated over and over and over again that leads to this transient, what was it called? Transient activator state. And rather than, right, not a single activation, right? And then neural trajectories would be the analog of the noticeable changes in experience we intuit, even as we simply look around the room or ponder a string of thought. So even the idea of me like thinking about a feature of this pen almost leads me down like a path. Like it's almost narrative in a sense. And we can make sense of that as connected to this idea of neural trajectories. So this would be the connections that are being fired off changing over time, that would result in these slightly different aspects of our experience. So when we're like scanning a room, or when I'm thinking about different properties of pen, its shape, its size, its color, every single time I'm noticing this other thing, different connections are being activated. That said, there's probably a lot of overlap, but there is still variation, which is directly affecting the variation we notice and experience. While I understand predictive processing and neuroplasticity are relevant here, I'm only interested in the context of how we can make the bridge from neural activity to a theory of mind about in-the-moment ontology and epistemology. So what exists, what things are, etc. So I'm trying to pin down the atomic neural activity of our experience of meaning. All right. Your formulation aligns closely with advanced concepts in the field. The atom of experience, transient attractor states. Is there evidence? Yes, there is substantial evidence from theoretical models and experimental data, particularly in the study of working memory, that supports the concept of a transient attractor state as the functional atom of a stable thought or percept. Percept? What is the pronunciation here?
Percept.
Percept. So a stable thought or percept. Working memory, the brain holding an item in mind, like a phone number, is a classic example. When the stimulus is removed, so I'm guessing this means when you're looking at the phone number, now it's removed and now you have to memorize it. Certain populations of neurons maintain persistent, self-sustained activity, the hallmark of an attractor state. This state is stable against small perturbations, distractions, and represents a discrete item, the number 5, for a short duration. So we can make sense of, even just me thinking about what a pen looks like, or, a feature of the pen. If I were to try to hold that in my mind, then that would similarly require some transient attractor state to be maintained. All right, recurrence and stability. This stable pattern is achieved through recurrent connections, a set of neurons exciting each other in a loop. Mathematically, an attractor state is a point of equilibrium that the system settles into. Not a single activation. You're correct. It's not a single momentary activation. It is a recurring activation of a discrete set of connections, a neural assembly, that maintains a high firing rate, allowing the representation to persist for the duration of the experience, despite the slight constant variation, noise, that exists within any biological system. The attractor state provides the stability and robustness for a brief atom of experience. All right, and then the flow of experience, these neural trajectories, Is this the analog of noticeable changes in experience? Yes, that is the core idea of neural trajectories in consciousness studies. If a transient attractor state is the stable moment, the noun/concept, the neural trajectory is the dynamic change, the verb/transition between those moments. Definition: a neural trajectory is the time evolving path the system takes through the high dimensional neural state space. This path represents the sequence of network activity patterns. So that's the main thing to focus on. The sequence of network activity patterns. So when you look around the room, your experience is not a single static picture, but a smooth flow of visual information, attention shifts, and recognition. The trajectory is the sequence of neural states as your attention moves from the lamp, attractor A, to the book, attractor B, to the window, attractor C. When you ponder a string of thought, the process involves rapid sequential transitions from one idea to the next. This dynamic sequence, I'm not going to know this word, itineracy. Let's get that pronunciation.
Itinerant.
Itineracy. So I think it would be that. And I should probably even look at the definition here. Traveling from place to place. Nice. Thank you. This dynamic sequence, itineracy between attractor states, provides the bridge for the ontology, what exists, the stable moment, and epistemology, how we know, the flow of knowledge/meaning, of our in-the-moment experience. The experience of meaning is thus the stable pattern maintained within an attractor state, and the transition between those meanings is the trajectory. So then I say, would it be an apt speculation then to say that the atom of experience would be a single activation, a pulse wave, etc., of brain connections? However, this activity must be transient for it to be noticeable, since experience is never instantaneous. This would be akin to Damasio's trajectory of consciousness, where we first have feelings and images, but once we have images about feelings, which wouldn't negate from the initial feelings activation, but rather involve subsequent activations which map information about the feelings themselves. The question then is, does a singular neocortical wave, I don't know if that's how you'd say it, that's what I'm trying to say. Okay, does a singular neocortical wave constitute an image of the feeling? I point out neocortical because that's what we associate with our actual conscious experience. So even though our feelings wouldn't be happening completely in the neocortex, perhaps, that aspect of the imaging of subjective feeling would, I'd imagine that's almost entirely in the neocortex, though I could be wrong there. Does a singular neocortical wave constitute an image of the feeling, or would even a primitive conscious/subjective experience require a transient state? So the answer, based on current neurodynamics, is that a primitive conscious experience likely requires a transient state, an attractor, rather than a singular pulse. Here is a breakdown of why using your framework. So, I mean, this is almost like a philosophical distinction, but I think it is probably best to go in this direction, where when we're considering the stuff that we see in experience, especially when we're considering meaning and something that we can intuit, we do want to focus on this like experience of explicit meaning, where it's not just the parts of experience that I'm not noticing, but it's the parts of experience that I can put into words, essentially. Now, granted, you could say that a singular pulse does contribute to the big picture, but for you to notice something specific in your experience, that would require some transient attractor state. So The speculation that the atom of experience is a single activation pulse is generally not supported in neuroscience for conscious states, primarily because conscious experience is defined by its persistence and stability against noise. So, single pulse versus transient attractor state. The duration of a single pulse is instantaneous, milliseconds. The stability is highly unstable, and consciousness, subliminal or preconscious processing. And then for transient attractor state, we've got sustained, typically longer than 100 milliseconds. Robust, maintains its pattern despite slight noise or perturbations. And then minimal neural requirement for a conscious percept, right? My recommendation is, what is the free energy principle? We've got the free energy principle in there. Yeah, we do have that in our predictive processing section. It is pretty important. It's interpretive, right? Like it's a interpretation of why our brain is behaving the way it does. So, you could say that the brain is behaving to predict for the sake of, not experiencing negative emotion or heightened states of arousal. And the question would be why, and the free energy principle says to reduce the amount of energy it expends. So then the brain needs to construct a model of the world such that it can make predictions that match reality, so that its affective responses aren't significantly, its affective responses, as well as what it requires, the organism to do, which would be like to adapt to what's actually going on. It needs to learn now, or it needs to figure something out. Now it doesn't need to do that as much because its model of the world is not leading to as much high stakes prediction error. The temporal minimum. Studies on the neural correlates of consciousness suggest that a mental event must be maintained for a minimum duration to cross the threshold into conscious awareness, often cited as around 100 to 300 milliseconds. A single pulse or wave is too fast to be consciously registered. All right, so now we got our time. The stability requirement for the brain to register this is an image of a feeling. That image needs to hold still for a perceptible moment. This holding still is the defining feature of an attractor state, a pattern of neural activity that stabilizes itself through recurrent connections, a set of neurons exciting each other repeatedly, making the percept or thought robust and noticeable. Therefore, the atom of experience is best viewed as the minimum duration the network must settle into a stable, self-sustaining pattern, recurrently activated pattern, a transient attractor state. So yeah, this is where it's a little difficult, because the AI here might be thinking that a moment of experience, especially when it's talking about like an image of something, or it's talking about a mental event must be maintained for a minimum duration to cross the threshold into conscious awareness. So the assumption here is that it's considering, how long it takes for something to be to actually be conscious. How do I want to say this? How long it would take for something to become cognizant for you, or for you to become cognizant of something. How long it would take for it to enter your awareness. And then the question is, what about if something lasted like 70 milliseconds? Like that, I feel like that would register somehow in your awareness, just not in your like direct awareness, maybe in your like peripheral awareness, or maybe it might affect some part of your experience. I'm not sure. Maybe that's just wrong. But regardless, we should be careful, and we should consider how, even though there might be some gray area here when we're talking about, especially when we're talking about explicit meaning, like how long it takes for me to recognize this as a pen, determinately so. So like, when we're talking about Heidegger or something like that, when we're talking about potential, like that is within the less than 100 milliseconds, whereas inauthentic being, collapsing on possibility, on concrete possibilities, that would be what happens around the 100 to 300 milliseconds, where I'm seeing something determinately as something, perhaps even before it gets into my head as a word. Now we kind of separate these, or we kind of simplify this in the document. We point out that there's explicit meaning and then there's like implicit meaning. And explicit meaning is the stuff that we could put into words. So that's when we think about the explicit meaning that I experience when I look at this thing and I think it's a pen. Like, there's no nuance to my recognizing it without putting into words and me putting it into words. But we do try to make that a difference between that and like the implicit meaning that I must understand. And that's a slightly different philosophical question than the stuff that is like either subconscious or, what's the other word? There's another word for, like, you're not actually aware of it, but it's a subliminally aware of something. Subliminally. What would this be? Below the threshold of sensation or consciousness. So what is subliminal awareness? What would that even be referring to? Processing stimuli below the threshold of conscious perception, allowing them to influence thoughts or behavior without conscious knowledge. So this is probably a good time to bring up when there's those studies where you'll be given an image of something for not long enough for you to actually register that you've seen it. And I think that would be the case here, where it was probably less than the amount of time, less than 100 milliseconds, and yet it still is registered in the sense by other mechanisms in your brain and body, causing you to think, like, now affecting your higher order thinking and what does come to your mind. So that's probably the way to go about that. Okay, so then Damasio and the trajectory of consciousness. Your comparison to Damasio is apt. His model emphasizes the integration and recursion necessary for a subjective experience. So Damasio's model simplified. There's feelings, core affect, a primitive non-reflective representation of the body's internal state. This corresponds to a primary neural state / attractor in subcortical and limbic circuits, and then images of feelings. This creation of a map, where the neocortex creates a higher order reflective representation about the initial feeling state, and then the neurodynamic translation. The feeling, initial affect, is attractor A. The transition to images about feelings is the neural trajectory from attractor A to a new high-level state, attractor B, the reflective image. And crucially, attractor B, the image, doesn't negate attractor A, the feeling. The new state involves attractor A plus neocortical mapping, representing the integration of the emotional content with a reflective conscious image of that content. So this is, just to be clear, this is like you knowing that you feel hungry. Like, your ability to say, I feel hungry, requires this extra image of the feeling of hunger that you get. And it requires us to be conscious for us to be able to actually, it requires us to be like self-conscious in a sense, for us to actually hold that state in our mind to understand that we are hungry. Neocortical wave versus transient state. The question boils down to the mechanics of the image of the feeling. Does a singular neocortical wave constitute an image of the feeling, or would even a primitive conscious subjective experience require a transient state? And it says a primitive conscious subjective experience requires a transient state in attractor. A wave is a transition, not the content. Neocortical waves, such as traveling gamma or alpha waves, are often viewed as the mechanism of communication that enables an attractor state to form or that drives the transition between attractor states. They are the transport mechanism, not the cargo. The role of recurrence. An image of the feeling requires a pattern of activity, the content to be broadcast across multiple widespread cortical areas and sustained long enough to be reportable, integrated into memory, and reflected upon. This sustained, stable pattern is the transient attractor state, achieved via recurrent activation across these wide-ranging neural assemblies. In short, the transient attractor state is the best candidate for the neural atom of experience because it provides the necessary qualities of stability, robustness, and temporal persistence that a mere pulse or single wave activation cannot. And then I say, just for fun, how many activations / waves would occur within the 100 to 300 milliseconds? So I'm wondering how many waves actually makes up your experience of something. How many waves are happening when I look at this and I see it's a pen? And the number of cycles depends on the brainwave frequency involved in the transient attractor state, right? Because there's different brainwaves frequencies throughout. There's different brainwave frequencies throughout the brain, perhaps even happening at the same time. So for the period of conscious integration, the most relevant waves are beta and gamma oscillations, as they are strongly associated with active cognition, attention, and feature binding, the glue that creates a unified conscious image. So cycles within the conscious atom. Gamma waves, the high-speed integrator. Gamma waves are typically defined in the range of 30 hertz to 100 hertz cycles per second, with 40 being a highly studied frequency linked to object recognition and conscious binding. This means a single minimal conscious percept would involve 4 to 10 full gamma wave cycles, providing enough time for the relevant neural assemblies to fire repeatedly, synchronize, and stabilize the pattern. Beta waves. Beta waves are typically defined in the range of 13 hertz to 30 hertz and are often linked to maintaining focus and long-range communication between cortical areas. At the minimum threshold of 100 milliseconds, beta oscillations are completing only 1 to 3 cycles, suggesting their role is less about rapid internal processing, like gamma, and more about setting up the broad foundational state of readiness or attention for the experience. Interesting. So, conclusion, your hypothesized atom of experience occurring over 100 to 300 to 300 milliseconds contains a surprisingly high number of activations. It's not a single pulse, but a rapid, recurring, and synchronized rhythm, giving the brain many opportunities, cycles to stabilize the pattern of activity that corresponds to a unified conscious moment. And then, the other thing that is involved here is it's not just a single pattern of activity, but it's a single set of connections being activated, like in the same area, but it's different sets being activated at potentially different frequencies, all happening at the same time, all creating the full embodied experience we have. So there would be activations that are giving us this image of what's happening, but then there's also activations that are interpreting the feelings that we have about the thing that we're seeing. There's a lot going on in the brain that contributes to your conscious experience. And then obviously, while this is all happening, there's all these bodily mechanisms happening. And then there's also the communication, the two-way communication between the body and the brain. And, this is affecting all kinds of stuff. That affects more stuff. So then I say, okay, so back to the beginning of the convo. Does schema theory account for this precision, transient states? And it says, classical schema theory, as originally conceived, does not explicitly account for the neurodynamic precision of transient states. Another recommendation I believe is relevant to this conversation is, what is the theory of time perception of David Eagleman, and how does this theory compare with other theories of time perception? So yeah, we could actually, maybe I'll throw that at the end of this conversation, because I think I don't see where it is, but I think we're I think we're close to the end, and then we could just throw that on. We could tack it on top. At some point, I throw the document in there, and I ask what it thinks. So, actually, no. I ask about the document at different discussions. So perhaps we can do that. However, contemporary models are now actively bridging this gap by interpreting the schema as a high-level description of an underlying dynamic brain mechanism. So now we can think of the schema not as just one cluster being activated once, not a singular cluster having some frequency of activation, but multiple clusters that we could say is a singular set, but the different clusters are being activated at different frequencies. They're involved in different loops. A lot's happening here. The limitations of classical schema theory. Traditional schema theory, founded by Bartlett and later developed in cognitive psychology, treats the schema as macro-level, relatively static knowledge structure, as a macro-level, relatively static knowledge structure, a kind of mental framework or blueprint. It focuses on organization and storage, how knowledge is structured in memory over days or years. And then resolution. It has low temporal resolution, discussing abstract concepts like assimilation, accommodation, and activation. The mismatch. A classic schema is the generalized restaurant script: get seated, order food, pay. This does not inherently contain the details of the 100 millisecond sequence of 40 hertz gamma cycles required for you to consciously see the menu in front of you. Okay. I don't know if that's the best example. Contemporary reinterpretation for precision. To account for neurodynamic precision, modern theorists interpret the schema not as the static blueprint itself, but as the long-term functional constraint that shapes the brain's moment-to-moment dynamics. The schema becomes the attractor landscape. So the schema would be the structure, the structural connection. The schema would be the structural connectivity and synaptic weights in the neural network that predispose it to settle into certain states. Look at that, predispose. That's what we're talking about. That predispose it to set into certain states, attractors. Schema activation, the transient attractor state itself, the rapid self-sustained pattern of neural firing that creates the conscious experience of meaning. And then prediction/expectation, the system's readiness to move immediately to a specific next attractor state trajectory based on the current one, mediated by oscillations. All right. And attention schema theory is an example. A specific example of a modern neurally focused schema theory is the attention schema theory by Graziano. This theory proposes that subjective awareness is the brain's simplified schematic model of its own internal process of attention. Okay. AST directly links a schema, the internal model of attention, to a dynamic precise function, the control of attention. It posits that the schema is what makes attention stable over time and adaptable, directly touching upon the persistence and control required for the transient attractor states. In essence, while the original theory lacked the language of neurodynamics, the contemporary neuroscientific view is that the schema is the long-term knowledge that sculpts the brain's dynamics, determining which short-lived transient states, the atoms of experience, are available to be activated. All right, so then we could say, I don't know if it's going to give me this because it didn't like that I was using the same conversation. But maybe we're good. Maybe we got it. All right, David Eagleman's theory of time perception argues that time is not a unitary phenomenon perceived by a single centralized brain clock, but rather a malleable construction of the brain resulting from multiple distributed neural mechanisms that process information at different speeds. Right. The perception of time, often referred to as chronoception. Oh, we're going to be taking out chronos a little bit later tonight. Is viewed as a dynamic, context-dependent process, highly susceptible to illusions and distortions based on novelty, attention, and memory. Eagleman's key concepts. Eagleman's approach emphasizes that subjective time is not measured by a dedicated regular clock, but rather is a side effect of distributed timing mechanisms. The brain uses different neural mechanisms for making different temporal judgments, duration, order, simultaneity. These mechanisms often agree but are not required to and can be dissociated. So that's pretty cool. Information density, coding, efficiency, the oddball effect. The subjective experience of duration correlates with the amount of neural energy or information processing dedicated to a stimulus. So time dilation, slow motion. When a person is in a high adrenaline situation, like a fall, or sees an unexpected / novel stimulus, the brain processes the event with higher density or greater neural energy. The subsequent memory is richer, and when the brain reconstructs the duration by reading out this dense information, the event appears to have lasted longer, creating the illusion of time slowing down. Nice. Time compression. Conversely, repeated or predictable stimuli are processed with suppressed neural responses, an effect called repetition suppression. This leads to an impoverished memory, making the duration appear shorter. This is suggested as a reason why time seems to speed up as we age. So the question is, why does time fly when we have fun? So then why does time fly when we are having fun? Which might not necessarily involve... what's the word I want to go for? I should say, which might necessarily involve positive valence novelty. Prediction. The brain often collects information after an event occurs and then settles on a final perception of what happened and when, sometimes reversing the apparent temporal order of actions and sensations. This highlights that perception is a complex, reconstructed narrative, not a real-time stream. Right. Comparison with other theories. Peacemaker accumulator model. Oh, the clock model. Yeah, so we don't want to deal with the peacemaker model at all. We're totally bought in. This seems plausible and intuitive. That's an excellent question that connects the theory of time perception directly to the role of attention and emotion. Time seems to fly when we're having fun because the experience involves a high degree of focused attention, which shifts the brain's resources away from explicit temporal tracking. The key is that attention and fun, positive valence, novelty, are often mutually exclusive with time perception. So Eagleman's neurodynamic model explains this phenomenon by contrasting focused attention with the neural effort required to explicitly track time. The role of focused attention. When you're having fun, you are typically highly engaged in a task or experience, a flow state. This strong focused attention is directed entirely towards the sensory details and cognitive demands of the activity itself, maximizing the brain's processing of the content. Result, this directs cognitive resources. Okay. Wouldn't the oddball situation or any high valence negative experience, high salience negative valence experience. Also, direct the intention entirely away from the timekeeping from time perception. The role of novelty, positive valence. While the experience of a novel and dangerous event like a car crash slows down time perception due to a sudden increase in memory density, as discussed in the previous answer, novel and fun experiences work differently. Novelty in the moment. When experiencing novelty for fun, your attention is continuously absorbed by the new information. This keeps the content processing networks highly active, but it may cause the temporal processing networks to become ignored. But yeah, I just don't understand them. Why would the negative be so different? While both situations involve intense attention, Eagleman's theory argues that the type of neural encoding is fundamentally different, leading to opposite effects on subjective time perception. So yeah, I mean, this makes sense. It's learning afforded by different mechanisms here. In both fun and danger scenarios, explicit time tracking is suppressed because cognitive resources are directed towards the content. However, the resulting time warping effect depends on how the brain handles memory and information processing for later retrieval. The brain initiates a survival response characterized by high density, high fidelity memory encoding. So attention is captured by the stimulus, right? The brain's emotional and arousal systems trigger a burst of activity, causing a sudden spike in neural energy expenditure and a marked increase in the rate of information storage. The experience itself might not feel slower in the moment. The effect is primarily experienced in retrospect. When you recall the event, your brain processes the exceptionally dense and detailed memory record. I don't understand yet why there is a difference of density in the memory record. This is going to be really simplistic, but doesn't enjoyment usually correlate with dopamine, which correlates with learning? High salience, positive valence. In a state of fun or flow, attention is voluntarily immersed in a predictable, rewarding activity. Right? Attention is directed top-down processing and locked onto the task goals. The dedicated neural resources for timing are suppressed, but the content is processed efficiently due to the familiarity and goal-directed nature of the activity. There's no sudden dramatic shift in encoding rate for the sake of survival. Okay, that makes sense. This question is going to be redundant, but let's just see it anyway. That is the central nuance. Dopamine is the key neurotransmitter in both enjoyment and memory encoding, but its pattern and target differ significantly between the two scenarios, leading to opposite effects on the perception of time. You're right that dopamine correlates with learning and positive valence. Here's how Eagleman's framework distinguishes the effects. The dopaminergic distinction. The difference between time flying and time slowing down is not the presence of dopamine, but where and how the dopamine signal is used by the brain. So in the fun one, it's being used for efficient learning, and then in the other one, it's used for a very heightened, forced type of learning, I'm guessing. In a fun or flow state, the brain releases dopamine into the basal ganglia and striatum, brain regions associated with movement, reward, and interval timing. Research suggests that a phasic burst So a rapid short-lived increase of dopamine in the striatum is correlated with a temporal underestimation, making an interval feel shorter than it physically was. This effectively speeds up the internal clock's perceived rate, making time feel like it's flying. Right. So while you are learning and consolidating memories, your attention is fully directed to the task's content, not on the passage of time itself. The temporal processing system is suppressed or ignored, leading to the in-the-moment compression of time. And then danger, oddball, adrenaline for hyperencoding. In a high salience, threatening, or novel negative situation, the system that governs the retrospective time illusion is primarily driven by arousal, so norepinephrine / adrenaline. So epinephrine, and the amygdala. Adrenaline's effect on memory, the amygdala, which is responsible for emotional memory, is intensely activated by the fear / novelty. It hijacks, so just to be clear, it hijacks memory resources, compelling the hippocampus to lay down an exceptionally detailed, high fidelity, and redundant memory trace, a flashbulb memory. This is where the difference lies. The adrenaline flood forces an oversampling or hyperencoding of the event's features into memory. The memory is denser because a secondary memory system was activated for survival. Okay. Time warp is retrospective, right? All right, that's good enough for me. All right, I think we're spent on that. Energy Dompter, if you're still here, then we could jump to the other topic, and then I'll probably end early and then switch over to the game. It's a little discouraging getting these recommendations, and then I don't know if you're here when I go over them. All right. So then I put in the document, I say I am attempting to make that philosophical... Okay, so I'm attempting to make a philosophical transition from neural activity to what we intuit as meaning and knowledge. In my mind, schema theory provides a nice stepping stone from the neural activity to concepts, which of course we only discover through thought and therefore activation. Thus, I think I need to make the schema theory subsection within my document a little more precise. That said, do you think there is a more effective way of making this transition? Are there better contemporary scientific accounts of what our experience of meaning is? Similarly, I make the case that our understanding is grounded in brain connections, but it is through activation that we discover what we understand through thought. Now, I guess it would still be apt to say that we can think about our understanding as sets of connections, but a singular activation of these connections doesn't result in the experience of meaning of that understanding. Rather, transient states result in the experience. And even further, it's important to consider that a concept isn't just a singular thought about that concept, but involves many different types of thoughts, which would result from various different transient states. Is this apt? Are there better contemporary accounts of neural correlates of understanding or knowledge? All right, your strategy of using schema theory as a cognitive bridge between the neural synaptic connections, prediction, error, minimization, and the phenomenological experience concepts, meaning, is apt and philosophically well-grounded within contemporary cognitive science. Schema theory provides the necessary level of abstraction. It allows you to speak of organized patterns of knowledge, schemas, that actively interpret information without being limited to talking only about individual neurons, too low level, or isolated concepts, too high level / abstract. The processes of assimilation and accommodation perfectly map onto the prediction / prediction error minimization cycle central to your framework. So, yeah, I mean, it really does set things up really well. So we don't have to go that deep, but I think we either should within the subsection or within the reference, the, what do I call it? I call it a complement, something complement, a bibliographic complement. So whenever we talk about schema theory, we could go into that detail. But we also could just, I might want to read through this and just see if there's a place that would make sense for it here. So I think we'll do that to end the stream off. Alternatives in contemporary context. While schema theory is effective, enriching your discussion with the following highly relevant contemporary concepts will strengthen your framework and provide the modern scientific language you're seeking. These ideas are not replacements for schema theory, but are complementary, providing a dynamic view of knowledge that schema theory often lacks. So we got the perceptual symbol systems and embodied simulation. You've already introduced embodied cognition, but the perceptual symbol systems provides a mechanistic account for how concepts are stored and processed in a way that directly relates to your embodied framework. So the idea is the concepts are not abstract amodal symbols like entries in a dictionary, but are stored as perceptual symbols, neural reenactments of the brain states that occurred during direct experience. Right, so we should be clear about that. Do we have that in the to-do? I should probably just open a different page for this. I think we talk about this in perhaps the memory section, so it's probably not important to talk about it there. So, I didn't even go to the to-do section. Nice. That would be here. And I did say that, right? Concepts are not abstract amodal symbols. Yep. So I did put these things in there already. But this is where we would want to put it, in the memory, pattern recognition, and habitual interpretation section, where we do say the same thing about our experience of meaning, I think. I think so. I think it's the same type of argument we make here. Crucially, no, the vital point here. And we might want to leverage the writing here, which I think is slightly stronger. Fortunately so. And we don't even go into schema theory in this one, so I think we're good. I think our video essay is still secure. So then, what else we got? We've got to conceptual blending theory and conceptual metaphor, the idea we understand abstract concepts like time, argument, or progress by metaphorically mapping them onto more concrete embodied concepts like motion, war, or a journey. So this is something that would go into the schema theory section because it specifically what did I grab? The concept justice. Where is that? I don't know, but I'm gonna throw it here. A family of related, was this lower? Yeah, yep. Dynamic neuronal ensembles. Okay, yeah. But yeah, we would want to make this type of case where we understand abstract concepts by metaphorically mapping them onto more concrete embodied concepts. For example, argument is war structures how We talk about and therefore experience disagreements. Is this a book? Argument is war. Oh, it's a conceptual metaphor. Oh, argument is war and war is hell. So maybe it is a phrase that was introduced for this very point. Win the argument, attack his points, shoot down his idea. Right. That is kind of crazy. Yeah, and then we could point out similar things. The concept of justice does not have one pattern. It's a family of related dynamic patterns that are called upon depending on the current context and relevance. Right. Another recommendation I believe is relevant to this conversation is What is the Theory by George Lakoff of Conceptual Metaphor. I think we found George Lakoff. I don't know if it was in this. Oh, we do, yeah. Yeah, I think we just read it. We understand abstract. Yeah, wait, we were literally just reading that. That was what we just read. By metaphorically mapping them onto, yeah. Yep. So yeah, I mean that is right in line with what we're discussing. And then this one, John Vervaeke. I don't think this is as similar. The mind's core function is relevance, realization, deciding from the infinite set of available internal and external information. I don't think it's an infinite set. What is important for the current situation or goal? So this is more of a interpretive lens. But yeah, and then I say, how does this quote align with? So this was a quote from Affective Neuroscience. Okay, so there was that. So now I'm gonna just read through this schema theory right now, just to see if we're good or not. I could probably get away with 170. The scientifically informed framework we now turn to, schema theory, stands as a foundational and highly influential concept within cognitive science. For decades, it has provided a robust way to explain how humans appear to organize vast amounts of knowledge, interpret new information, and guide their behavior. Within this framework, we can think about distinct aspects of our understanding as if they are organized into schemas. A schema in this theoretical view can represent an organized pattern of thought or a mental structure, be it a concrete object like a tree, an abstract concept like freedom, a sequence of actions for an event like going to a restaurant, a social role, or even our complex understanding of ourselves. Schema theory posits that such an organizational pattern is the cognitive result of the brain's continuous adaptive learning process, reflecting the regularities and structures derived from our countless encounters with the world. So that's all good. Functionally, schema theory provides a way for us to make sense of how our minds interpret the world. It suggests that incoming sensory information is processed and filtered through these existing conceptual patterns, leading to the emotional dopamine-induced experience of familiarity that we've previously discussed. In this framing, when a schema is cued by relevant stimuli, it guides interpretation along familiar, efficient routes, a description that aligns with our understanding of well-reinforced habitual neural pathways. Furthermore, schema theory offers a useful model for conceptualizing how our understanding adapts in response to new information. So all this stuff is fine, right? These processes can be seen as cognitive analogs to the brain's response to new learning and the crucial role of prediction errors. Schema theory further illuminates the multifaceted nature of our understanding by proposing we possess numerous schemas for different domains. For instance, our conceptualization of color is clearly linked to a more specific schema for red. These schemas are not... So the paragraph we should add, which goes over Lakoff and these other points, would be like right before or right after this, probably right after this. This model can help us conceptualize how our felt understanding can transform holistically, as a change in one area of experience can indeed reshape our wider perspective on the world and ourselves. So this would be, yeah, maybe we would go here, like before this paragraph. Ultimately, schema theory provides us with a valuable and accessible language conceptualizing the dynamic, organized, and adaptable nature of our own deeply felt understanding. So, what do we have here? Aligning with our intuitions. As discussed, our ultimate aim is to cultivate a representation that also deeply incorporates and illuminates our direct intuitive experience and meaning. So I should just search active. There we go. However, what enters our conscious awareness as explicit meaning is not arbitrary. Different contextual schemas activated by our current situation and concerns. Okay, I see. Set active schemas when we actively make sense of. All right. Where do we see? Oh, here we go. In this framework, we can think of a progression. The brain's neural connections and activity give rise to activated schemas, the dynamic so we actually talk about this at such a high level that it doesn't, like, we don't actually say anything wrong about schemas. Like what activation is required to get the outcome that we're thinking about. So in this framework, we can think of a progression. The brain's neural connections and activity give rise to activated schemas, the dynamic operational patterns. These schematic processes, in turn, result in our conscious and unconscious experience of interrelated concepts. These experienced concepts, then, are the subjective correlates of that underlying schematic activity. They are how our understanding, shaped by those deeper processes, shows itself to us, whether as the implicit knowing that guides our habitual actions or as the more defined notions that emerge when we consciously reflect. Man. Absolute bars. All right. What else? Do we still have any more activation? An echo of the emotional significance and neuromodulatory processes integral to the activation of their underlying schemas. Activity. So perhaps we should go back to the memory section. Where are we? We'd have to go back a little farther. This might be it. Yeah. So, furthermore, neuroimaging techniques allow us to observe the hippocampus becoming highly active when individuals are successfully encoding new experiences or retrieving recent ones. The hippocampus was also what was involved in the high density memorizing or constructing memory, which led to a low or a slowdown in time as you replay that memory or rethink about it. I believe another recommendation is relevant to this conversation. However, it is possible that you will believe that the recommendation is speculative. You might as well let it rip. The prefrontal cortex plays a crucial role in actively working with these stored patterns, allowing us to hold patterns in mind and compare them with new information. Right. All right. Hold patterns in mind. That's the transient state. What was it? The transient activation state? I think it was transient activation state, or is it just trans? Yeah, probably that. Transient state. It facilitates the strategic retrieval of relevant memories and enables us to use these recognized patterns for reasoning and generating top-down predictions about the world. Through such interplay, stored patterns are actively applied and refined, contributing to our conscious experience of understanding. As these memory traces are formed, consolidated, and repeatedly activated, our ability to recognize patterns emerge. When current sensory input or even a particular line of thought sufficiently matches a well-established pattern represented by these neocortical networks, the specific neural ensemble, we're ripping neural ensembles, corresponding to that pattern is activated. Okay, so this is making sense. We are talking about this in line. And the neural ensemble would involve all the connections required. And I think it's all the connections required potentially being activated as part of different loops at different frequencies, contributing to our full embodied experience of the meaning. So when we think about memory, it's crucial to understand that it is not like a repository of obviously distinguishable units, but rather as a complex dynamic organization of synaptic connections. The storage of a memory or a pattern in the neocortex refers to the strengthening, weakening, and configuration of these connections in such a way that specific networks activate in a particular manner when cued. When we retrieve a memory or recognize a familiar pattern, specific ensembles of neurons across the neocortex become active in a coordinated fashion, reflecting the learned associations and strengthened pathways that constitute that particular piece of knowledge or understanding. This activation is the experienced memory or the recognized meaning in that moment. It is this neural reinstantiation of a learned pattern that then often triggers a distinct cognitive and affective experience, a feeling of familiarity. Oh my gosh. All right, I was doubting the comprehensiveness of what we had. This brings us to a crucial nature about the nature of memory itself, one that aligns with our intuition that memories can change over time. Because as we discussed, learning involves the physical alteration of neural connections under the influence of neuromodulators and experience. And because these connections are subject to ongoing neuroplastic changes, it follows that memory is not a static recording, but an active reconstructive process. The neural pathways forming a memory trace are not fixed. They are subject to the same processes of synaptic stress. Okay, so this is one discussion, but there's also the idea that when memories are created, they're not also, it's not like they started out in like as the exact construction. It is like an attempt at replaying the experience, like, you know, reactivating the involved neural ensembles, but there's some loss of fidelity. What is the theory of Henry Bergson, and how does his theory of time differ from Heidegger's theory of time? So Heidegger's theory of time is very different than what we've been talking about so far. Just to be clear. Heidegger's theory of time is actually quite similar, or it connects quite nicely with predictive processing. Like, you might think that our brain is, you know, we predict something and then we act on it, but our brain constantly predicts. So even when it seems like we are leveraging the prediction itself, we're in this state where our brain is already predicting what potentially is not what we already think it is the case. Like we're always future oriented. Bergson's theory of duration and Martin Heidegger's theory of temporality are two of the most influential but distinct philosophies of time. Both reject the mechanistic clock time of classical science, but they diverge in method, focus, and existential meaning. Bergson's theory of duration, core idea, distinguishes real time, duration, from spatialized time. We've talked about this guy before, I think. In Time and Free Will, he argues that time as we actually live it, duration, is qualitative, continuous, and heterogeneous, whereas the time of physics is quantitative, divisible, and homogeneous. Okay. Time as yeah, like this is fine. Okay, yep, all that's good. Duration cannot be divided without falsifying it. Any attempt to measure or analyze it converts it into space. Whoa. How do we get here? The experience in consciousness cannot be divided without falsifying it. That doesn't make any sense. Dividing experience, what does that mean? Any attempt to measure or analyze it converts it into space. Okay, so when it talks about space, I think it's referring to something like lowercase b being. Like you're making it an object. You're objectifying it. That's what space would mean, I think, for Bergson. So right, this makes sense, but I don't know. So divided would mean objectifying as well. It cannot be divided without falsifying it, and falsifying it because this is also similar to Heidegger. When we talk about truth, we're not talking about, things that feel objective to us or things that appear to be objective to us or things that manifest as objectively true. Truth for Heidegger is the state of being towards potentiality itself. So it is that state of our brain predicting at every moment. So that state of, even when you are feeling like you have found the objective truth about the world, there's part of you that is, open or at least looking for something else to be the case, or just looking to the future, the potential that what you believe right now is not the case, and that doesn't go away ever. So qualitative multiplicity. Moments differ in quality, not quantity. Duration is a synthesis of feeling and memory. Right. This is all fine. This is all in line with what we believe, or at least the way that we've been looking at this stuff. Creative evolution. In later works, duration is also the basis of life's creativity and freedom, a vital force that continually invents new forms. So, yeah, I'm guessing this is also referring to potentiality itself, like potentiality as being the thing that creates all concrete meaning that you ever come to know in space, right? It creates space, and it creates what, I guess, yeah, I think in Bergson's view, it's, you would say converts it into space. So whatever creates space would be this true potential, or this true orientation towards potential itself, which is experienced as duration. So these are actually quite similar. I feel like these are quite similar theories. Bergson's aim is to restore intuition as the method for grasping duration. Intellect spatializes, intuition sympathizes with the flow of becoming. So, yeah. Heidegger's theory of temporality. In Being and Time, Heidegger develops a phenomenology of temporality grounded in Dasein, the human being's mode of being. That should be capital B. Time is not an objective framework, but the horizon within which being is understood. So Heidegger distinguishes three stances of time: future, projection. Dasein projects itself towards possibilities. So when Heidegger talks about authenticity, the authentic mode of being, he's referring to the future. When he's talking about truth, he's referring to the future. Past, having been. This is, once we objectify something, then it's as if it has been this case, or that's how, we're already behind it. Like for something to, for me to see this as a pen, like it's as if this was a pen. Like we're past that now. Dasein is always already thrown into a context it did not choose. Present, falling. Dasein is absorbed in the everyday world. This is the description of our brain leveraging, our whatever it is, our memory slash context slash linguistic systems to ground what we're seeing in some, socially shared meaning, or at least it feels socially shared. But it's grounding it in something that feels objective and something that feels socially shared. These are not separate moments, but interrelated dimensions of existence, right? These are like the three ways we could look at this. Primacy of the future. For Heidegger, temporality is fundamentally oriented towards the future. Our being towards death gives time its existential structure. And just to be clear, what is happening out there? Just to be clear, being towards death is not being towards our end of life death. It's not being towards our biological death. It's being towards death in the sense that because our predictive processing is constantly going, then the world as we know it at every single moment is going to die. And it's going to be experienced anew at every moment. Our brain is always, once again, projecting ourselves, our true self, right? Like a conscious experience, not like what I believe to be myself. It's projecting our conscious experience towards, and it's not possibilities, it's potentiality, because concrete possibilities would be in the mode of the present falling. It's like once your mind considers that something could be in some range of concrete possibilities, you're already in that mode of falling. But potentiality is possibility of possibility itself. Like you're not there yet at all. All right, authentic versus inauthentic time. Inauthentic time, everyday clock-based time, vulgar time. This is the same thing as dividing time and converting it into space. Conceals the deeper temporality of existence. Authentic temporality, when one confronts one's finitude, death. Time is experienced as one's own most possibility, revealing being as finite and temporal. All right. Ontological aim. Heidegger's question is not epistemological, but ontological. How time makes the understanding of being possible. Time is the condition for any disclosure of being, not an object within the world. Right. These seem to actually be making a similar ontological and phenomenological point. There seem to be many analogs between the two. Largely, these figures, I imagine that these figures would largely would agree on what they are implying. So let's see what goes on here. So yeah, what happens at the beginning of here? I just want to make sure. Certain areas become particularly pivotal when we consider the manifestation of our understanding through processes like memory formation, pattern recognition, and habitual interpretation. The hippocampus, for instance, which we've previously noted for its role in organizing experiences as they happen, appears central to the initial formation of new episodic memories, those detailed, context-rich collections of specific personal events. Studies involving individuals with hippocampal damage, for example, consistently show profound difficulties in forming new long-term memories. Furthermore, okay, so this convergence of evidence points to its specialized, okay. This initial binding then serves as a foundational step in creating a memory that can later be accessed and contribute to the recognition of broader patterns. Okay, so we are actually just, the first idea is we're laying out these parts of the brain. As these memories traces are formed, consolidated, and repeatedly activated, our ability to recognize patterns emerge. So at somewhere in here, I feel like we have to talk about how memories aren't like the same exact experience again, but it is an activating of the. In theory, it's activating the, or it's an attempt to activate the patterns of, or the neural ensembles that activated during the experience itself. But as we just saw with yeah, let's actually, can we put this in the to do in memory? It's important that we include the fact that a memory is not the actual event, but is a storing of the neural ensembles that were activated during the event with some loss of fidelity, or I don't know if that's the with some with what would be the way to say this? It's not like a loss of fidelity. It's just like it's an attempt. Is an attempt to store we can point out the we could point out Eagleman's theory of time to make the case to make the intuitive case as to how memory is not always a direct representation of what happened. Okay. You're right to notice that Bergson and Heidegger share deep affinities. They both break from the mechanistic Newtonian conception of time and instead uncover time as lived experience and constitutive of being. Still, their analogies emerge from different philosophical directions. Let's examine both where they converge and where they fundamentally diverge. So, rejection of spatialized. Okay, so there's that, but like each grounds time and subjective experience. Yeah, but I'm not referring to the. I should say that. I'm not referring to the different philosophical traditions. No, what was? Oh, directions that they take, but it seems like Bergson and Heidegger share a similar view of truth. Actually, I don't want to go through this. I think I said it well enough. Maybe I'll ask the transcription Gemini, but we'll see. Probably not that important. I might just call it here. I think I'm gonna just play some Hades for a little while, and then I'll read more neuroscience stuff. It's just what I do now. It's just my life. So, but thank you, Energy Dompter. Thanks for the suggestions. Led to some good discussions and also good additions to the document. and we will slowly get there. But whenever I see this, I'm stoked. We've left the document in a good state, I think, but we do need to make a ton of changes to it, for sure. Okay, and then I wanted to read through the summary and practical direction here. So this is still the Alex O'Connor video that I'm gonna film sometime this week, I think. Summary and practical direction. So where does this leave us? Ultimately, this debate presents a choice between a non-scientifically grounded, speculative, and merely metaphysical hypothesis, and a scientifically grounded, though still speculative and incomplete theory. Thus, this choice is about which standard of inquiry we commit to. One path offers a metaphysical solution that, while compelling, relies on concepts that are currently ambiguous, untestable, and unfalsifiable. The other, while acknowledging its own gaps, adheres to the rigorous standards of the scientific method, proposing falsifiable hypotheses grounded in the observable world of biology. That said, to be absolutely clear, the hard problem of consciousness is not yet resolved, and we still don't quite understand how our underlying biological mechanisms generate the subjective experience we can each intuit. However, our framework suggests that the difficulty of the hard problem may not stem from a ghost in the machine, but from the inherent nature of the machine trying to understand itself. Think of it this way. Our very ability to ponder consciousness, or to even mindfully pay attention to our consciousness, relies on a conceptual understanding of consciousness that our brain has learned and now reconstructs. We are using a product of the system to analyze the system itself. As we've established, our understanding is a dynamic and subjective biological process. While our subjective experience feels obvious, our conceptual grasp of it is filtered through our unique, ever-changing neural architecture. Perhaps this is why consciousness is so difficult for each of us to pin down. Yes, you can ask a personal question. Thus, I suggest that using our intuitive sense of our own consciousness is the foundation for a grand theory. Thus, I suggest that using our intuitive sense of consciousness as the foundation for a grand theory about the nature of the universe is a philosophically precarious step. Rather, a more practical and productive direction involves starting from stable empirical ground by focusing on shared, observable, and testable biological phenomena. In conjunction with the subjective experiences they strongly correlate with, we can collaboratively and cumulatively build a more precise and reliable understanding from the ground up. All right. That's the big finale there. That I think that read well. I think that works. Man, this is going to be an absolutely banger video. Oh, man. The amount of quality in each of the videos is going to be, in each of the videos on my channel, is so lopsided. Every time I read through the document, it's so much higher. This video is going to be... Oh, what is going on here? You've come back. Do I like ASMR? I actually used to... what's funny is I used to... I mean, I do like ASMR. I like it conceptually, and I, you know, in theory, like listening to it. I used to use ASMR all the time while I was working, or like while I was doing something. I even used it to go to bed at a certain point. But once I started taking Vyvanse, then I can't use ASMR anymore because it's too much stimuli. So I actually have stopped taking ASMR, or I've stopped using or listening to ASMR in the past, like, I guess, year and a half that I've been on Vyvanse, just because it's too much. I can't work with like music in the background or ASMR in the background. It's just too much going on. But yeah, I needed it. Like I think it was an ADHD thing. Like I needed that extra stimuli going on in the background for me to pay attention. What is going on here? 3 weeks ago. Yo! Our boy! Is this like a, is this a creative child of, of Hug Me, I'm Scared? Don't go
How are
for...
things going?
No way.
I'm just thinking. I've had Goldie for years, and I had to bear him yesterday. It's just strange that he's gone now. Where do you think he is?
I'm not quite sure, but some people believe that when a loved one passes away, a small piece of them can come back as something else to visit you when you're sad. I don't see why it'd be different for a fish. I'm sure he'd still want to come by and check up on you.
Jesus. Oh my gosh. Oh. That scared the hell out of me. Oh my gosh. What have we done?
Someone's at the door.
Someone's at
We'll
the
be out
door.
this late.
10. Yo, is it the fish? Don't do it. Don't do it. Oh, you've come back.
Hello?
Watch it be
Who's
like...
at the door?
Watch it be the fish is on the ground. Oh, is that the fish?
It's a butterfly.
Oh my gosh, what is happening here? Why do you keep us here? Oh my gosh, this is terrifying. Ah. I mean, that was actually pretty well done. I'm gonna give that a good like here. That scared me so much. Getting them to look like puppets while being CGI is super impressive. I was fully not expecting the bird Muppet's voice to just sound like some normal guy. I love when people who make horror content decide to randomly have something kind of wholesome on their channel. Anyways, this was great. Keep it up. All right. That's so funny. That knocking absolutely scared me. Energy Dumpster, I'm not sure if you're still here. I don't know if you're writing a response or if you heard what I said, but I'm gonna end the stream, and then we'll start up a Hades stream shortly. So maybe I'll see you there, and we'll continue the conversation. If anyone else is watching, have a good